Today, we're going to go rounds 7 through 12. Mainly focus on the favorites. We might throw in a couple least favorites as they pop up in the rounds, but just because these middle rounds, ADP can be thrown out the window, I'm not exactly sure if least favorite is as important. But Pat, the middle rounds are where obviously you can separate yourself as a drafter, how you can be ahead of the curve on ADP, and they can really help you win your fantasy leagues when coming around to your draft time.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of cliche to say something like this is where drafts are won, but the margin for error is much higher in rounds 1 through 6, 1 through 5, and this is where the outcomes become much wilder, and you can get yourself a league winner, or you can get yourself someone that you clearly need to cut after week 1. This is when the separation begins in fantasy football drafts. So very important, critical round. We don't talk about them that much.
No.
But this is where the money is made.
And once again, we're going to use FFPC ADP. It's a tight end premium league. I don't know if I'm not talking about any tight ends just because of that, but the reason we are using FFPC is because there's money involved. And it's not just random mock drafts that people out there are going by, because these drafts, they actually are trying to win money on their end as well. So why not use their ADP? Okay, Pat, again, we're going to go with favorite picks here in the middle rounds, round 7 through round 12. And you kick us off here with round 7.
This is a round where I didn't love a lot of the picks. I like a lot of the picks more in rounds 8 or 9. And it was hard for me to highlight what I, just someone I had to have in this round. I thought about going with Marquise Brown, a great pick in this round, but I actually think I'm going to highlight Darius Geis, which to a lot of people, to a lot of sharps, probably sounds like a bad pick. Probably very high odds it could be a bad pick, but this late in the draft, it's hard to find a running back who doesn't really need something in front of him to happen for that back to return value. And I think Darius Geis, as long as he can stay healthy, which has been a humongous issue for him this summer, will open week 1 as the clear RB1, someone that they really want to succeed, someone who in his brief time on the field last year did re-demonstrate his big play upside. And just this part of the draft, when you can find a running back who can kind of reach their upside right off the bat, don't need an injury in front of them, don't have to blow up a committee, that's pretty rare. And so this is, again, this could be a real dunce pick, but this is a part of the draft where I am comfortable betting on Darius Geis' upside at running back when there's not a lot of instant upside left at running back in this part of the board.
You could have given me a list of 10 or 12 people to pick, and I didn't think you would go with the running back 30 and Darius Geis. But Pat, I love it. I mean, a lot of people are off Geis this year, so being on him, like you might be, could benefit you in the long run. I keep talking about Scott Turner and what he's going to bring to this Washington Redskins offense, mainly in relation to what it's going to do for Terry McLaurin. But we know in his backfields in Carolina with Scott and Norville Turner that they basically only rode one running back the entire time. And it was Christian McCaffrey playing on the field and being on the field 90+% of the time. And Pat, it's not like they didn't try to invest in backups, right? When Christian McCaffrey had his breakout, they went out and God, who was the running back? I just forgot who it was. He then went on
Anderson
to go.
Was on the Panthers.
Yes, CJ Anderson. They used some free agent capital on him, and they basically cut him halfway through the year because they had no idea how to use him. They didn't know the usage. So he's going from an offense where, as much as we talked about Cam Newton, Christian McCaffrey was the identity, right? And they just didn't know how to create when he wasn't on the field. Now you go to a team that has no lead back. It's Adrian Pearson, who's a 0 in the passing game. Darius Geis, who I think has 7 career receptions. They go and, sign someone like J.D. McKissick and draft Antonio Gibson. It's fascinating because if Darius Geis sees 70% of the workload, which, again, the Turners are known to do in their offenses, then he's going to be an absolute value.
I will say Adrian Peterson is probably a little more of a threat than we'll give him credit for because, Frank Gore gets all the old back love, but Adrian Peterson has, to me, honestly been the better version of Frank Gore the past 3 years. He's still maybe just replacement level runner, but Adrian Peterson is still providing more in the run game than Frank Gore. I think he should get more of the old back love. And like he's done it 2 years in a row now. He's kind of like fallen off the bench into a lead role and still been like totally fine. But yeah, so I can't say there's no downside for Darius Geis. Obviously, there's a lot of downside, but I just think right off the bat, he'll be in a position to reach his upside, and that's hard to find at this part of the board.
He's running back 30, but Antonio Gibson is all the way down at running back 61. I don't even see Adrian Pearson. I mean, he's running back 62. There you go. So it's this interesting dynamic, Pat, where obviously there's an investment in that lead ball carrier, but it's maybe one of the last backfields that anyone is drafting out there at all.
Which fair.
Yes, very fair, especially with, they did not fix the left tackle position.
No.
It's probably even more questions than there were heading into last season. So yes, I understand it, but there is a chance. I mean, we saw at times Scott Turner make chicken salad out of whatever they had in Carolina last year. And that's probably with a lesser quarterback who's his backup quarterback now. If Dwayne Haskins plays well, if this team has positive game script, then the running back position is going to be productive. And that's something that I don't think a lot of people are projecting or expecting. But if it happens, then again, Darius Geis is going to be a great value. I love it.
There'll be lots of weeks where even if Darius Geis has a good season where he will get game scripted out of fantasy value, but RB30 is a bargain. And he's still just a third. We know how explosive. We loved Darius Geis as a second rounder. A lot of people thought he could have been a first round pick. So very severe injuries, but I think he deserves one final chance in fantasy.
All right, let's go to round 8. I have that pick in round 8 again. And we had some discussion on this. Hopefully my projections are correct, where that's anywhere from pick 84 to 96. A few players in this area. Okay, I'm going to throw them out there. Your Austin Hoopers, your Marlon Macks, your Tyler Boyds, your Will Fuller. Hey, even Sony Michel is going somewhere in round 8. I'm going to go with a wide receiver, which is not surprising at all because this is the area of the draft that we love wide receivers. I'm going to go with Michael Gallup, wide receiver 31, number 91 overall. And Pat, here's a little survey for you, okay? These are 2 wide receivers that were on the Cowboys last year in terms of production. Wide receiver A, 119 targets, 79 receptions, 1,189 yards, and 8 touchdowns. Wide receiver B, 113 targets, 66 receptions, 1,100 yards, and 6 touchdowns. Wide receiver A was Amari Cooper, and he's going as the wide receiver 9, ADP of 35 overall. The second one is, yes, Mr. Michael Gallup. Their production, their opportunity, Pat, was basically identical, yet there's a 22 wide receiver drop and split between them at the position, and that's just screams value to me.
It does, and it kind of speaks probably to fear about CeeDee Lamb. But people kind of forget. I mean, the Cowboys had a legit number 3 wide receiver last year. Randall Cobb was not a total zero. I mean, Randall Cobb kind of had a bounce back season, so it's not like Michael Gallup is suddenly stuck in a 3 receiver offense where he was in a 2 receiver offense before. So I totally. I mean, Michael Gallup did everything we wanted him to do last year. Someone we loved as a rookie who didn't quite deliver, but then as a sophomore, took that huge step forward and played through injuries. Even had a few things working against him, and still took that really obvious leap forward. And a player that we had thought we had reason to love, and kind of delivered on it. So yeah, he's looking like a huge because this is not like the Cowboys are just now becoming a 3 receiver offense. The circumstances have not changed as much as we like to tell ourselves that they have.
And to continue your point, no one is saying that this is what is happening, but ADP dictates that the majority think that CeeDee Lamb is just going to overtake Michael Gallup in the pecking order and just take all the attention and the opportunity that Michael Gallup had. But again, we're forgetting what Randall Cobb did last year. I mean, 83 targets, 828 yards, and 3 touchdowns are on the table in what Randall Cobb left. There's plenty for everyone here. The issue is I don't think it's egregious, Pat, to mention and list him where he's going among wide receivers right now. I mentioned the likes of Tyler Boyd and Will Fuller, AJ Green is in that same neighborhood, Deebo Samuel, Jarvis Landry. These are all super talented wide receivers that I would feel comfortable taking most of them. So it's not like I expect Michael Gallup to necessarily jump up 5 or 7 spots in the wide receiver pecking order as we go into drafts in August. It's just fascinating to me that someone that was so productive last year, that the reason he didn't get paid the big money like Amari Cooper did this offseason is because the Cowboys don't need to pay him. He's still on that rookie contract. That these 3 wide receivers that the Cowboys have probably make up the 3 best wide receiver tandem in the NFL. And I would strongly suggest that no one forgets about Michael Gallup at all.
Yeah, that'll be an interesting. We should ask Mr. Over Under, John Daigle, next time he's on the show, if he thinks CeeDee Lamb can reach Randall Cobb's 2019 receiving total. I would take the under on that.
Okay. Speaking of Mr. Daigle, he was supposed to be our captain here for round 9. Quick shuffle, improvisation. Pat, you're on the clock once again. Who's your favorite selection here in round 9?
Well, I was banned from talking about Matt Breida again. So I'm going to talk, Julian Edelman. You're talking about, we're at kind of a part of the board where there's a lot of receiver upside, also just a lot of great receiver floors. But I'm going to take Julian Edelman. We talk about, everyone talks about how the Packers didn't add any pass catchers. The Patriots didn't do anything, and they lost Tom Brady, Julian Edelman's soulmate. But he's had at least 100 receptions each of his past 3 full seasons. He had a 14-game season in there where he got 94 receptions. And, even if N'Keal Harry takes a step forward, even if Mohamed Sanu is healthy, Brian Hoyer and Jarrett Stidham are the kind of quarterbacks, they're going to need some layups. And no one gets to the hoop easier for his nice little 2-point layups than Julian Edelman, some of the easiest receptions in all of football. And, a very critical part of the keeping the Patriots offense moving this season is, I'm assuming, is going to be keeping Julian Edelman in his element. And he should just not be going in the 9th round. Someone who we know, if he's healthy, is going to be a compiler. And, it's not always the sexiest in fantasy. We know he's not going to have like these huge spiked weeks, these huge ceiling games, but the Edelman floor just does not go away. And even with Tom Brady, I think he just remains too critical to this offense to assume anything's really going to change for him.
Pat, we're basically with where Julian Edelman is going, believing that Jarrett Stidham is just going to be absolutely awful, right?
Which,
like that,
again,
it's possible. I also want to point out. I don't think
so, but it is very possible.
Right. And I also want to point out that, Chris Sims is doing, and this is a little cross promotion here. Chris Sims unbuttoned his podcast, but he's going through his top 40 quarterbacks in the NFL right now. And he has Jarrett Stidham here at number 35 and believes that Stidham is going to be the long-term answer for the Patriots. It's not just a one-year thing. That could absolutely be the case, yet no one is talking about it. Again, Julian Edelman, you mentioned it, Pat, 5 straight seasons of 100 receptions? That is wild. That is not something you should be getting at wide receiver 35 at all.
3 straight healthy seasons. So, there's always caveats with Julian Edelman, but the past 3 seasons, he's played 16 games, which includes last season, he's had 100 catches.
So, and the wide receivers going directly above him are basically unknowns. Like, they've done it nicely in certain times when on the field and they flashed. But Julian Edelman, despite being in like that age 33 or 34 season, has been one of the most consistent fantasy producers that we've seen in the last 5 years. Okay, Will Fuller going right above him. Deontay Johnson going right above him. Brandon Cooks right after him. Marvin Jones, Christian Kirk. I think we can all grab on to little things that we like about those 5 wide receivers that we just mentioned. But if you've gone and selected some high variance types already in your drafts, why not get someone like Julian Edelman? Because at worst, Pat, if he plays 16 games, do you expect him to drop below 75 catches this year? 80 catches this year? No, not at all. And that's the difference that everyone is banking in here with his drop in ADP, that he's basically just going to plummet from a volume standpoint.
Yeah, and that's really a great way to frame it, which I didn't think of. What is even, if you play 16 games, what is the worst case scenario? It's probably 75 catches. Right. And if you told yourself you can just guarantee yourself 75 catches in the 9th round, that's probably a trade-off you would take.
And I think there's a difference. I bet his production is going to be very similar to maybe someone like Jamison Crowder. And I feel like and Jamison Crowder's going after him. So maybe this isn't the best example I'm about to make, but I also feel like there's been a lot more hype for Jamison Crowder this offseason, right? Maybe that's the bubble we live in, Pat, but that I just see Jamison Crowder is a great pick in round 10 or 11 or 12 or wherever you're able to get him. Again, it's stunning to me that Julian Edelman is just not getting enough conversation. And I think it goes back to just this belief that Jarrett Stidham is going to fail. And I don't want to be among those that instantly believes that already, because we don't know anything about it.
Yeah, and Jamison Crowder's never failed to deliver on hype before, right?
I don't want to make you go back to back. So before you get to your round 10 favorite, Pat, why don't I throw out a least favorite? Okay. And hopefully we aren't, crossing over here, because if this is your favorite, then we're going to have some issues for the rest of this podcast. My least favorite pick in round 10 is Darrell Henderson.
You know what? John can't make the pod because of audio issues, and then you immediately character assassination.
Well,
Mr. John Daigle was not even here to defend himself.
Let me bring up why. What has Darrell Henderson done to warrant the running back 43 selection in drafts? I mean, in his career, which was just last year, he's had 39 carries for 147 yards, 4 receptions for 37 yards. Pat, I love whenever I go and talk about these young players, because there's not a lot to work with or remember back on in their NFL careers. I go and watch their highlights. I try to do that on YouTube, and it just gave me an error message, because it basically is just his preseason stuff from last year. And especially when you consider, as the running back 43, Malcolm Brown, who I think universally is going to be listed above him on the depth chart to start the season, is going as the running back 66. So I do not understand at this point hanging your hat on anything positive in Darrell Henderson. And he's the type, just like last year, that people are either going to hang on to too long, or it's something in the preseason we have to see stunning play that would warrant this selection right now.
Yeah, and this kind of plays into earlier why I said I was comfortable with someone like Darius Geis, because look at the other running backs. Look, when you usually at this part of the board, you have to take someone with like huge question marks, and Darrell Henderson's are more extreme than most. But yeah, I mean, these are the kind of running backs you have to invest in at this part of the board, as players where you just really a lot of times don't know their role at all. And it's funny too, the Darrell Henderson's in a backfield where you could say this about kind of all 3 running backs. Like, what has this person ever done to deserve to be drafted here? Which highlights this, totally chaotic situation, or at the very least, we need to wait for more data points and get something from training camp, get a quote, get some sort of rep delineation in practice, because we're just totally flying blind here. And it doesn't speak well, obviously, to Darrell Henderson that the Rams invested a 3rd-round pick in him last year and then immediately saw fit to invest a 2nd-round pick, I believe their first pick, and yet another running back this year. So I would be steering clear of Mr. Darrell Henderson.
And I brought this point up on a previous podcast, but the conversation that surrounded those running backs after drafting them, for Cam Akers, it was this foundation back. He can be the focal point of your offense from a backfield standpoint. When they drafted Darrell Henderson, the name that was brought up was Lance Dunbar. So maybe his career goes in that direction of Lance Dunbar with the Rams, which is forgettable. But I mean, and this is just one final data point. Like Hayden Winks posted this article in Rotoworld, which you can check out right now, that as much as we want to diminish pass protection as this idea that, every running back has to be great in order for him to see time in the field, that's not true. But we also know, Pat, that 1, the Rams offensive line is not good. And 2, coaches do care about pass protection rather than training camp, because you and I have to blurb those quotes all the time during training camp. Well, Darrell Henderson, coming out of Memphis, among pass pro reps, was 264th in the nation. Okay. Then he just saw 6 pass pro reps last season. Still an unknown in that area as well. And one final note, Pat. Darrell Henderson and Tony Pollard played together at Memphis. In fact, Henderson started over Pollard in the backfield. Which one do we feel like astronomically better about entering their 2nd year? And it's clearly Tony Pollard.
It's Tony Pollard, who, by the way, has become a foundation back in my Madden dynasty. Not for me, but for my friend's team on the Packers. He's now one of the lead backs in the entire NFL. You're talking about pass pro with Darrell Henderson. That's not important really with Jared Goff, because Jared Goff's very good under pressure. So
right.
It doesn't really matter if your running back whiffs on a few blitz pickup assignments. So
yeah, if the opposing quarterback has the highest drop off of passer rating from clean pockets to being disrupted, why not, send 2 or 3 extra blitzers, just more than the offense can account for, and get after it. Possibly. Okay, that was our least favorite. We spent way too much time on that, Pat. Who was your favorite pick in round 10?
We're on round 10 here, Josh. Is that where we are?
Yes, right?
Man, this one was like, maybe we should just cancel the podcast instead of me talking about this player. Because I don't know if I'm really feeling it now that the lights are on. But I was going to, first off, hopefully I didn't misread the ADP. No, I didn't. I'm going to talk about Mr. Jackie Doyle, who, again, it was probably a good idea not to talk about tight ends. I forgot it was tight end premium, the good folks at FFPC. But I'm just talking about Jack Doyle in general, who is kind of, a complete afterthought, being drafted as like a barely there tight end too, when this is someone with an 80, 90 catch season on his resume, no longer in a 2 tight end. He kind of Trey Burton. We'll see what happens there. But Phillip Rivers, maybe you could say it was the talents he had at tight end. But Phillip Rivers, his entire career, has peppered tight ends with targets. Literally his entire career, Phillip Rivers has produced a tight end 1. And Jack Doyle, who's Andrew Luck's favorite, so we know he can be a quarterback's favorite. And just tight end 18 just feels way, way too low for me for Jack Doyle. I think he's going to bounce back, have a way higher target floor this year, way higher catch floor than he had with Eric Ebron the past 2 years. And it's kind of like a free money pick in the final rounds of fantasy drafts. Wow. There's a lot of upside at tight end this year, a lot of really exciting upside picks. But if you miss out on the upside, like Blake Jarwin, Jonnu Smith, Ian Thomas, you will be probably happy with Jack Doyle with one of your final picks.
I like this. I feel like, again, in our bubble, that Jack Doyle's getting a little bit more buzz than he has previously. And you mentioned it, like Trey Burton's on that team now, Mo Ali Cox. Frank Reich wants us to write a blurb about him every single week, so he talks about it.
Seriously, for years.
And I'm not saying that either of those are bad talents. I mean, there is a reason why, like, Trey Burton got so much money in the first place from the Chicago Bears and then did nothing with them, right? And Mo Ali Cox, when there have been flashes, the flashes have been good. But Jack Doyle has done it, right? And sure, along the way, he's also picked up injuries while doing it. But he's still a very good tight end. And if he is on the field in every single personnel grouping as that lead tight end, he's going to get volume. And you mentioned some of the names: Jonnu Smith, Blake Jarwin, Ian Thomas, Chris Herndon. If those guys go off the board and you really are waiting at tight end, which is, I think, something you and I are both advocating for this year, if you're not getting one of those first 2 names, I think Jack Doyle doesn't have to be at the end of that list, but you should still feel fairly comfortable with him as your top tight end to start the season. And if there is an improvement out there in the waiver wire as the season goes along, boom, pick it up and go with it.
Yeah, he's just a good, safe option to plug in if you miss out, and should provide, at least the 4 catch floor, I think, on a weekly basis.
All right, let's move on to round 11. Did you have a least favorite in round 10, Pat?
I did. Should we just talk about him now, Josh?
Yeah, and then we'll move on to round 11 after that.
I've been told, it wasn't this round, my least favorite was going to be Josh Allen, but I was told I'm not allowed to talk about him anymore. He was in round 7. So I go with round 10. I'm going to go with Phillip Lindsay, who, kind of like a great fantasy folk hero the past 2 years for obvious reasons, undrafted, at least 4.5 yards per carry, behind a bad offensive line the past 2 years. But for me, the key for Phillip Lindsay this year, like the way for him to get on the field, what would have made the most sense to me would have been third down. But he's never been efficient as a third down back. There's not much production as a pass catcher aside for some empty catches. And Melvin Gordon, much, much better as a pass catcher than Phillip Lindsay. There will be some people who argue, probably correctly, that maybe actually they're looking at Phillip Lindsay more of a change of pace on early downs. But when the guy in front of you is a 2-year, $16 million contract, I just don't think Melvin Gordon's going to be ceding many carries to Phillip Lindsay. And I definitely think Melvin Gordon will be the primary back on third down. And to me, that's just a recipe for no standalone value for Phillip Lindsay. And this is a little early to be taking, to me, what amounts to like a pure handcuff. And Phillip Lindsay has a lot of handcuff value. But, even if Melvin Gordon gets hurt, there's probably just going to be a committee still, right, with Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman. So he might not even have as much plug-and-play value as people assume. And I just don't think Phillip Lindsay has enough, or if any, standalone value to be investing, a top 120 pick. And just someone I'm steering clear of, unless I get information, unless we get like a great quote laying out of the Broncos so you can use the running backs. I just don't see the path to standalone value for Phillip Lindsay right now.
That's a good note, Pat, because it's odd. Philip Lindsay is really one of those storylines that we should have been rooting for, like a couple years ago, last year, this year, right? But for some reason, Rotoworld Football Podcast listener John Elway just wants to replace him like at every single corner, Like even when entering the NFL, they use a third-round pick under Royce Freeman, and immediately Philip Lindsay outplayed him. Immediately.
Quite literally immediately.
Yes, and was the best back in that offense. And now when a talent like Melvin Gordon is out there, John Elway says, okay, we're going to go and get him. And because we want this bigger back, like they want this guy who can create yards on his own through contact. It's so weird because Philip Lindsay's like 5'7" and 180 or 90 pounds, something like that. But I think he runs like big for his size, Pat. Like his vision is impeccable. He's like a slalom skier in between the tackles, but he's not one of these like airbacks, someone who wins out. He's not Tariq Cohen, right? So
no.
Like you're not getting that type of role out of him. I still think like in his opportunity, Philip Lindsay is going to be productive, but I truly would be shocked if Melvin Gordon does not see 65, 70% of the backfield work, because it certainly seems like John Elway like has always envisioned since drafting Royce Freeman and Melvin Gordon type in his offense. I know it's not his offense. He's not the one calling plays, but when building a team, and now he has that type in Melvin Gordon.
Yeah, and it's possible Philip Lindsay could become more efficient as a receiver when that's like his primary role, and he's not more of like a 2.5 down back. But we have a pretty long track record of Melvin Gordon being more efficient as a receiver than a rusher, and I just don't see why the third down role would develop, and I don't see any reason to expect Philip Lindsay will get enough run on early downs to be worth that ADP.
All right, so we just talked about two backs that we dislike in the middle rounds, and Darrell Henderson and Philip Lindsay. I want to give you one here in round 11 as my favorite pick, one who I think is a tremendous value in the middle rounds, and that's Latavius Murray, running back 44, number 128 overall. There are a few other players in that area, right? CeeDee Lamb, who we talked about earlier, Darius Slayton, Tony Pollard, Jerry Jeudy. I mean, we talk about locking up your running backs early because then it gets super dicey, but Latavius Murray is someone who has standalone value, some of it. I'm not going to say he's going to be a weekly starter for you, but in a pinch, you can put him out there. I mean, he averaged 11 touches per game last year, 9 carries and 2 receptions. But giving you that little bit of floor, his ceiling is tremendous. I mean, in 2 starts that Alvin Kamara missed last year, in each game, Latavius Murray saw 33 opportunities. The first one, 27 carries and 6 targets to the tune of 151 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was the running back 2 that week. The next week, 33 opportunities once again, 21 carries, 12 targets, 157 yards, 2 touchdowns, the running back 3 that week. I mean, we have forgotten that Latavius Murray has basically filled this Mark Ingram role that he left behind and went up to Baltimore to go take. Murray's not losing that this year. And sure, Alvin Kamara might not be as injured or banged up as he was last year. That doesn't necessarily matter because, Pat, no matter what, Latavius is going to be part of the game plan, and I expect that once again in 2020.
Yeah, I mean, he slid directly into the Mark Ingram role. Like, they didn't change it at all. And this is the role that I feel like probably Philip Lindsay drafters like think or hope they're getting when they take Philip Lindsay in the same part of the board. And it's like aspiration to Philip Lindsay where we know it exists with Latavius Murray. And like you said, it's not like you'd be psyched about starting him when Alvin Kamara is healthy. But if you can plug him in, he's got reasonable touchdown odds any given week, probably at least 6 to 8 carries most weeks, even when Alvin Kamara is healthy. Alvin Kamara has never had a 1,000-yard season. We know the role's not going away. And like you said, the Saints, have another data point to maybe dial it back on Alvin Kamara. He got the ankle injury and was banged up all year, and just maybe make a more concerted effort to keep him fresh. So yeah, this is like a perfect late round running back pick because there's a little bit of standalone value, but then you have a plug and play legit RB2, almost low end RB1 as a handcuff. So that is what I look for when I take late round running backs. Is the combination of clearly you want someone who's gonna have a lot of value as a handcuff. But all the better, a great tiebreaker if they have a little standalone value, and Latavius Murray has that.
I'll go a step further. If Alvin Kamara misses games, Latavius Murray is a plug-and-play top 12 running back in fantasy football formats. He was last year. He was last year. And this stat comes from the great Rich Rebar, okay? The Saints had just 13 rushing attempts inside the 5-yard line last year. Just 13 rushing attempts for one of the best offenses in the NFL. In the previous 2 years, it was 20 and 33. I mean, we know how few touchdowns Alvin Kamara scored on the ground last year. A big part of it was just the lack of opportunity. And, Alvin Kamara outrushed Latavius Murray inside the 5-yard line. But even if, their split continues, there's going to be more volume. There's going to be positive regression in that area. So just expect more opportunities inside the 5-yard line for both Alvin and Latavius in 2020. Okay. We've hit on round 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Let's jump, Pat, to round 12. Close it out here. Again, this was a John Daigle selection. He could not join us, sadly. He'll be here next week. Pat, who are you going with in round 12?
Well, John was going to go with Mecole Hardman, and someone else we've talked a lot about on the podcast.
A lot about. In fact, we just talked about him on Tuesday's episode. We did 6 breakout players of 2020, and one of my nominees was Mecole Hardman. So I'm just so glad that John Daigle just Control-C, Control-V'd his notes from that episode and just wanted to plug them into this podcast.
Yeah, we can keep it brief, but yeah, I mean, we know what Mecole Hardman did last year on such limited targets, such limited catches. I mean, just outrageously efficient, amazing compiler. Sammy Watkins, we know, has been de-emphasized. Shockingly, wasn't cut, but took the pay cut. It's kind of the Chiefs kind of formalized what was already the reality on offense last year, that Mecole Hardman's already the number 2 receiver in this offense. And I think not that the Chiefs passing game needs to bounce back, but I mean, it's going to be a bounce back year by a lot of metrics, I'm assuming, for the Chiefs offense, where we have a healthy, because even before the knee injury last year, Patrick Mahomes was banged up very early in the season. I believe it was his ankle, right? And this Mecole Hardman, again, anytime a young player, a rookie, their pre-draft skills, they're buzzed about skills actually translate, immediately you have to take notice. And that's what happened with Mecole Hardman. And yeah, he's going to be hyped by everyone because it's just very obvious. And elsewhere in this round, I mean, this is a good round. This is the Jamison Crowder round. It's the Eric Ebron round in Pittsburgh. Maybe the Steelers make Eric Ebron a thing again. And yeah, I was going to say something almost too crazy for the podcast. I don't think I should say it, but I would.
No, you should say it, Pat. You should say it.
See, no, I'm actually not going to say it. Never mind. It's going to be about Drew Lock. Just going to wait. I'm going to refine this take more. Basically, It's going to be along the lines of I'd much rather have Drew Lock at his ADP than as my second quarterback, as Josh Allen at his ADP as my first quarterback. And I'll just leave it at that. I was going to add a more molten level to that. But
let's close it out instead. And again, I just want to reiterate that here in round 12. Round 12. Our pick, just for graphic purposes, Mike Murphy, is Mecole Hardman. And I want to point out this, and I didn't point it out in our Hype Train podcast, which you can all go listen to from Tuesday, which I thought was fantastic. These were the touchdown lengths that Mecole Hardman scored last year. This, again, is from Scott Pianowski. Touchdowns of 83 yards, 63 yards, 48 yards, 42 yards, 30 yards, and 21 yards. That is the type of player that Mecole Hardman is. Now, there's 2 sides of that, right, Pat? There's one side that is saying that none of those were easy. Those were all long touchdowns. None were obviously inside the red zone where, the majority of touchdown passes are caught. The other part of that is, what if he's just not that type of receiver that wins in that area of the field? Can he replicate those long touchdowns? I mean, 4 touchdowns of 40+ yards, and that's not even, I think, including a punt return touchdown. So it's this interesting conversation with Mecole Hardman right now. And I said this on the podcast, but it's one where, we talked about it with Randall Cobb leaving, right? He leaves 83 targets on the table. There are no targets left on the table for the Chiefs. They're in the exact same situation from a pass catching group as they were last year. So Mecole Hardman has to jump someone on the depth chart for him to really hit in 2020, I think.
Well, so I think that they're kind of formalizing him over Sammy Watkins on the depth chart. And while the long touchdowns are very fluky and obviously not a year-over-year statistic, Mecole Hardman is operating in an offense where Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce occupy so much defensive attention and create so much space. mean, we saw Sammy Watkins had a 190-yard game. So we just know the space the Chiefs kind of like background pass catchers get to operate in. And again, it's not a static transitions year to year, but Mecole Hardman is going to get chances at those kind of plays again.
This is simplifying it tremendously, but this is basically at worst Ted Ginn in the best situation imaginable. And
is a better Ted Ginn.
Well, I think Ted Ginn, this is the weirdest football take ever, but is one of the more underrated players in the NFL over the last decade.
Well, I was going to say, Ted Ginn, amazing draft pick, because if you're a first-round pick and you're still in the league, 13 years later, you are a good draft pick. I just meant Mecole Hardman kind of early. Ted Ginn didn't do this early in his career.
Ted Ginn has been the butt of jokes for his entire career, but he's still doing it. And basically on some of the offenses, like in Cam Newton's MVP season or the season before that, he was the most dynamic wide receiver on that team and the one that defenses had to game plan for. It certainly was not Kelvin Benjamin, even though Kelvin Benjamin had the production. It was Ted Ginn that puts fear in defenses. Just want to get that off my chest, Pat. So
it's a what a time to be alive type offense. Looking back on it, isn't Cam Newton going absolutely crazy with Kelvin Benjamin and Ted Ginn?
And the right side of that offensive line being Byron Bell and Nate Chandler, I believe.
There we go. Panther fan in you.
Yes. Aston Villa all the way. All right. That's going to do it for us. We are done here. Again, if you are interested in how your first rounds of your draft should go back and listen to our favorite and least favorite picks in rounds 1 through 6. Here, again, we did rounds 7 through 12. In a couple weeks, if not a week, we'll go and do another live draft with you on this podcast, see what types of changes have made, go inside a different mind, either probably Pat or Hayden or Daigle at that point. And if you enjoy this episode and this podcast at all, rate and review, subscribe, tell one friend. Most importantly, it really does help us out. All right, Pat, thanks for joining me. Thanks for being crystal clear. I told you look handsome today. I truly meant it. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, Pat. All right.
Thank you, Josh. Up the Villa.
Up the Villa. We'll talk to y'all soon. See ya.